Okay, so now we're going to try what's known as extended gesture. So it's going to be more of a 15-minute pose. So we're going to use a whole piece of newsprint in this case, and we're going to not only concentrate on the 1, 2, and 5 minute aspects of the image, but we're going to lay on top of that a little bit more information, specifically the idea of cross contour and a little bit of shading as well. So it's very important that you're looking at the light side versus the dark side of a feature, the light side versus the dark side. In this case, the light is coming from the right-hand side and illuminating the left-hand side of his body. So in addition to looking at the roundness of the form and trying to get that sense of roundness that we see in cylindrical appendages, or that planar quality of the chest, we're also going to be exaggerating those marks, really pushing the value variation. So I would recommend starting off with your HB pencil to start with, something that's kind of a middle range, and then moving into the 4B as we get into the extended part. So again, I'm going to look for that kind of overarching movement through the figure. You'll notice that I'm drawing on the whole page now. Look for where the head's going to be. Now, the problem with this is that we've got to reserve a little bit of room for what's happening above his head. So I'm going to determine that this is the top of the image and this is the bottom, with a little bit of room for the feet. So we're going to look for the hips, which are halfway between the top and the bottom mark. We'll notice that there's a slant to the hips in this case because the weight-bearing leg is the right leg, so that's going to pull the hips up a little bit. Once we've got that indication of the pelvis, we can go ahead and start massing in the forms. Now with a male, you're going to see a much more triangular form. Also notice that there's going to be a tilt to the collarbone. I'm going to switch pencils here so that you can see a little bit better. Obviously, it's very light in your point of view, so we want to exaggerate a little bit so that you can understand visually what I'm speaking verbally. So again, we've got the overall sweeping mark. We put the head a little bit lower than the extremity of that mark because we want to have room for the arms. Halfway between the head and the feet, we've got the hips, and again, there's that movement from left to right, moving in with a simplified shape, an ovoid shape. And then we've got the shoulders and the rib cage. Now you'll notice in the male that there is a much more triangular point. Now again, you know, we're looking for that core line. Moving from this hip, you have that outer leg moving kind of in an internal diagonal. And then we have the arms. And I kind of like to look to see that movement as far as the relationship between the elbow and where that mark or that change of direction happens. It's kind of like a circular shape, so we could think of it that way. And then we've got the arm coming up closer to the head, I notice, and then there's a grasping, and I can kind of check to see that those elbows are correct relative to one another. Now with the head, we've got the cranium, and then the front of the head, It's a side view, so remember it's going to be kind of squarish. So now we've kind of gotten into the 1 minute mark of our gesture. So I'm going to go ahead and flesh out those forms. Now, one of the things that I notice about biceps and the other arm, you obviously have an oval shape here. I like to break the arm, the forearm down into an oval shape and a conical shape. And then you've got the bicep again here, touching the back of his head. And then again, this kind of oval shape of the upper muscles of the forearm, and then a conical shape in the lower part as we transition into the wrist. Sorry. I see a movement down the center of his chest that looks something like this. The groin area is triangular. So now I'm starting to move into the 2-minute zone. We could also think of the upper leg as a round egg shape with a cone, then the knee is round, and then a round shape for the calf, and a movement down into the lower ankle. So again, over here we could think of that as a round mass with a cone on the end of it, a round mass with a cone on the end of it, and this just starts to give us an idea of the contours and their edge quality. So the foot again is going to be below that. The foot is kind of like a ball with a trapezoidal shape. This foot, the ankle is a little bit higher because it's moving back in space. It's got a foreshortening happening to it, moving back in space. All right, now that we've got that down, now we can start thinking about pushing our lines a little bit more and starting to think about features, the tertiary and secondary details. So remember, the eyes are going to be halfway between the bottom and the top of the skull. The nose is going to be halfway between the brow and the chin. Thinking about the pectoralis muscle. Starting to use some contour lines to perfect those edges. You can see his rib cage really well here, and then that underarm area, kind of a straight line here. I'm really paying attention to this negative shape, so thinking about that negative shape. And here's where you can see that kind of ovoid cone shape can be helpful in delineating the outer contour of that form. Now I'm really paying attention to this negative shape here. So you can see that I'm stressing that negative shape. Men have a very pronounced brow. ear is set back on the head when we're in a 3/4 view. Remember, it's just above the jawline. So there's quite a bit of distance there. The lips are halfway between the bottom of the nose and the chin. Again, looking at this little negative space in between his head and his forearm is really helpful. Now, one of the things that I might think about doing at this point is really thinking about the roundness of the form, and also thinking about how there's shadow and light. So, for instance, in this part of his arm, you can see a darkness underneath, and then in this part of his arm, you can also see a darkness. This can help you to realize the shape a little bit more. And again, you're not really sticking to a contour, you're just looking at the light and the shadow. Thinking about the fact that his entire left side is in shadow. And you'll notice that I'm thinking about this as a plane. So I'm making marks that aren't shading in, but they're more of a hatched process. And they're very loose. I'm not worried about the edge too much. With the hands, because we're drawing on a smaller scale, you have to think about kind of breaking them down into component parts. So there's the palm here that you can see, the thumb pointing down, the fingers are kind of a squarish shape. I'm not drawing individual fingers. And you have something similar here, where you have a linear shape here, and then the thumb here, which is a smaller linear shape. So we really fool the viewer. Sorry about that. On this small of a scale, it's probably going to be easier to look at the shadow and how the shadow is working to help you understand those hands, because you don't see a lot of them because of the way that they're interlocking. I'm not really thinking about drawing a beard. I'm just thinking about blocking in tone. So it's not about texture. It's about tone. And looking to see where the tone is. Sometimes it helps to squint. So obviously a beard is going to have a darker tone. Than the surrounding skin. But you can see as we start to deal with gesture, we really start to get a great sense of dimensionality. So that's about 15 minutes worth of drawing and what we would call an extended gesture.